Hey, all right, and welcome. Here we are in John Park's workshop. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I gotta turn off my volume here on this machine so we don't get an echo. Whoa, there we go. Hi, welcome. Let me switch this camera for you real quick. And hey, there's a little hint of things to come. Today on John Park's workshop, we're gonna look at lock picking. We're going to get inside a particular kind of lock called a pin tumbler lock and talk about how it works and talk about how it works when you have a key as well as how to get it to work when you don't. So thank you for checking in. We got Stuff with Kirby over on YouTube saying audio is good. Yay! And thanks everyone who's joining us in the chat over on Discord as well. So show of hands, how many people here have done some lockpicking before? Let me know in the chat. I'm curious about the exposure people are getting to lockpicking. A lot of the times, people who are interested in making and Adafruit and these kinds of things, or security, like conferences like DEF CON or Black Hat, if you've been to a maker fair, very often you've run into lockpicking workshops, which is very exciting and lots of fun. There are some organizations such as Tool, which is TOOOL, and that's the Open Organization of Lock Sports, I think, or lockpicking. Check them out. They have a couple different websites, one for the US and one I think that's international or based in Europe. Those are great resources for info about lock picking. In fact, I'm going to show some info, a couple of images. Mostly I'll do live demos on some gear I've got back here and some cutaway locks and some regular locks. But I do have a couple slides that I'll show you. A tad out of the sync to my mouth, kind of like anime. Oh, that's weird. I don't know what to say about that. I hope it clears up. I'll wait after every sentence. Maybe I won't. That's weird. Okay, so no further ado, let's step over to the workbench and take a look at some basics of lockpicking. Hey, say hello, Nicole Lipoccolo, John Baca Middle School. We're teaching the future. Can I teach the ethics of this also? Sure. Let's start off with that. So I like to think that the ethics are actually related but separate from the skill and the tools necessary for picking locks. So like a lot of things, it's not black and white. There is a gray area here. In general, don't pick a lock that you don't own or a lock that you have permission to pick. So very often I've had friends come to me and say, hey, I am locked out of my such and such, a shed, a little box, or whatever. If I know that it's that, I trust that person, I know that it's their thing, I'm happy to help them with it. It's maybe more interesting than cutting the lock if it's the kind that you can cut with bolt cutters, or sometimes it's a filing cabinet or something that you kind of have to damage to get into. So that's the basic idea, right? You don't want to, oh, it's that camera, you're right. Okay, I'm gonna switch over to this camera. Thank you, Kirby. That camera has some sync issues. So let me go over to the main cam. I'll turn this one off and let me turn on the bench cam and we'll continue that discussion because I think it's a really interesting one. Okay, so here I am. I think this has much better sync. So thank you, Kirby, for helping troubleshoot that. And let me just turn on my iPad so I have the chat here. I've got the Discord chat, and 1 second, I'll pull up the YouTube chat. I'm getting faster at that, right? Top chat, is that what it does? Yes. Okay, so question about the ethics of picking locks. Don't pick locks that aren't your own or locks that someone who you trust who owns that lock or owns what's on the other side of that lock has asked you to help them out. That's number one. Number two, check for the legality in your state if you're in the US or whatever locale you're in if you're in another country to make sure that there aren't laws prohibiting you from A, possessing lock-picking tools, and B, using them. Also, possession outside of your own home versus out on the streets. In general in the US, and by the way, tool, T-O-O-L, is that 3 L's? .us, I think. Google it. They have a list of all of the laws in the different 50 United States. That's a good place to look. And in some cases, in most cases, I'm in California, and as far as I understand the law in California, the issues around having lock-picking tools are more related to intent. So if you're caught climbing over a wall into a bank and you've got your lock-picking tools, you're going to be in big trouble. If you're walking down the street and a cop asks you for whatever reason, what time is it, you go look at your watch and your lock picks fall out, you're probably going to be in less trouble. But either way, be careful. So I hope that answers some of the question on ethics of lock-picking. Another note real quick is that you can damage locks by trying to pick them. So a key generally works the best. If you're not careful, you can damage the pins that are in the lock, we'll talk about that in a second, to the point where the real key, if you do go and find it, might not work or might need to be adjusted. So be a little bit careful. I wouldn't go practicing for your first time on the locks that lead into, let's say, your house until you've gotten a little bit of experience with it. The other thing you may run into at first is people who are new to lockpicking often will use too much pressure, too much force in the sort of two things that they're doing with the tools, which we'll talk about, and break off. You could potentially bend or then break off a part of a pick inside of a lock. So be careful about that. So, okay, so let's talk now about how the lock mechanism works. And I'm going to start off with this wooden model I built. So let me switch over to this camera here. And there we go. So imagine this is the inside of a lock. And there's a cylinder that can rotate, and we've cut a little less than halfway into that cylinder so we can still see the pins and part of the mechanism that holds the pins in place. So for the mechanism to turn, and imagine for a second, this is the orientation of the lock and the keyhole. That's not really a keyhole here. That's just a coincidence that that line is there. But this is the angle from which you put in a key and try to turn it left or right. So in simulating that with this model, imagine we're trying to lift this bottom piece up. And you can see it's binding because, or it's being stopped from lifting or moving or turning if it were a real lock by these things. These are called the driver pins. And the driver pins, in this case, this is a simulation of a 5-pin pin tumbler lock. And this cylinder can't get out of the, can't move, can't rotate until these driver pins are up above this line right here, the separation between the two pieces, which is called the shear line sometimes. So imagine, and this key I made actually doesn't quite work, but imagine it did. What direction do I have this? I think I have this backwards. Imagine if the key comes in and lifts all of those pins. You can see my key doesn't quite work. So that the driver pins are up above this shear line. I'm just going to do that manually here for a second. Then these two parts separate, right? So that's, imagine the cylinder has rotated. Now on the other side of the cylinder, on the back side of it, there's usually something that then will turn a latch or mechanism, and that's actually kind of separate from, it's connected but separate from this cylinder mechanism. So let's relock the lock. So I'm going to just push these down. Now in a real lock, you'll have springs that are pushing down these driver pins. And these bottom pins are called the key pins. These are the ones that have varying heights that then correspond to the key that's cut for that lock. And so if you imagine all of these to be the same size, you'd be able to just put a thin piece of metal in, lift all at once, and the thing would open. But that's not the case with a normal lock. Instead, the varying heights of these key pins is what corresponds to the varying heights of the key and makes it a little harder to open. Now, the principle behind picking a lock is that the imperfections in the way the lock is built allow a little bit of rotation to happen before you've actually properly set the pins. So imagine this little bit of slop is introduced here with a tool I'll use called a torsion wrench or a tensioner or a tension wrench. If I use, I'm just going to use my hand here, if I use this tension wrench to push up on this model lock, or imagine a real lock, I'd be rotating it, what happens is the driver pins will sort of bind when you push up. You can see that some little change happened there. When we push up with a picking tool, in this case I'm just using my finger or my thumb, some or all of these will end up kind of popping up over that shear line, and now we've opened it. So without knowing in advance what the height of these little key pins is, using picking tools we can add a little bit of tension to this and then push up, sometimes not in a nice neat order like I just showed you, we'll talk about that in a moment, but by pushing each of these up until the driver pin gets lifted up above that shear line and kind of gets stuck there because this little shelf here has, let's see if I can show you that a little closer. If this tension, so I'll do it this way, if this tension that I'm pushing this way on the cylinder is just right, when I lift, just, there it goes. So this top pin just lifts up and over and gets hung up on that ledge. And now this one's free to fall due to gravity. There's no spring or anything keeping this here. So as you go about the rest of your picking, you kind of want to leave this guy alone for the most part. You may have to kind of gently move him as you're picking. But the fact that you've gotten this driver pin hung up above the shear line and on this little ledge here is what's holding it in place until all the others, in this case 5 of them, are above that shear line. So let's see if there's any questions. Yes, thank you Adafruit for pointing out. It's for educational purposes only. I should mention that. Be sure to check with your local, state, federal, global, universal laws to make sure that you're in the right doing this. So the, let's see, the next thing I want to do is show you this on a real lock. So I'm going to switch to my, let's go to my little close-up here of a cutaway lock. I've got a couple of these actually I want to show you. So I'm going to move this old wood model out of the way here. And now let's take a look at this padlock. So this is a sort of regular padlock. I think this one is a 6-pin, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And sometimes you'll see something that looks like an additional pin. So in this case, it looks like there's a 7th pin here. I'm going to point at it with this so you can see it. This actually is just holding the cylinder from popping out. So it's the key doesn't reach that one, and it's sort of an interesting design choice. But I've seen a lot of locks made this way, where there's in this case, a 7th pin that's not for picking. It doesn't need to move. It's just set down into a little channel, keeping the lock cylinder from popping out. It probably just makes assembly easier, actually. So here you can see I've got the proper key for this lock, and when you watch those cylinders, you can see those pins, rather. You can see those driver pins. Let me move this just a little bit more central for you. You can see those driver pins are resting at different heights. Now, those driver pins are actually all the same height, but it is their key pins that are taller or shorter. As the key goes in, what you're going to see is those key pins are pushing the driver pins up and down. And now all the driver pins are resting right above that shear line, and notice how they look like they're even. Now, this doesn't always have to be the case. The driver pins in a more secure lock may have funny shapes to them, look like little spools of thread. These are called security pins that can make this process harder. And they may be of different heights, but this is fairly standard for an inexpensive lock for those driver pins to be the same height. So now that those are all at the same height, you can see I'm free to rotate my cylinder. Now, if I rotate far enough, it will engage the little hasp that's holding this shackle. All right, so that's the goal of this, is to get all those pins up above the shear line, and then the lock will open. Okay. So before we go picking that one, I want to do a little demo on picking this really big lock. So let me switch cameras again, and I'm gonna, I think you can see it pretty well from here. I was gonna zoom in, but I think that'll work actually. One thing about lock picking is you can do it with a very, very simple and small set of tools. I've accumulated a lot of tools, and I love gadgets and gear and things, so you'll notice that I have a lot of stuff, and my bench here is covered in all sorts of different lock picking things, and I'll explain what some of them are in a minute. But you actually don't need much to do it. So here is this sample lock that I built of the interior of a pin tumbler, and this is the key. I'm actually not going to use the key because it turns out acrylic on acrylic has a ton of friction, and I made a lot of sharp plateaus here in the pins, and so it's really hard to get this thing in. The key is harder than picking it in this case. That does work, but it gets jammed in there. I even tried waxing it. It didn't work. So here we can see this bottom part that's got the purple behind it. That is my cylinder that's trying to rotate, trying to turn when the key is placed in the proper position and all the pins line up. So I'm going to turn that a little more so I can see it too. There we go. So here's the principle behind picking this again. I'm going to do it by pushing, and I've left a little window here so I can access the pins. So what I'll do is try each of these pins while putting a little bit of rotating force or tension on the cylinder. And what I'm looking for is pins that bind. See, this one's a little bit hard. This is a little hard to push up, so I'm going to... Okay, so I've got the red driver pin caught up above the shear line now. And now I'll work my way through the other ones to find out which is the next one that's difficult. So what happens is there's a kind of binding order inside the lock. Very often I find that the first pin to bind or stick like that and help me get the driver pin above the shear line is towards the back of the lock. So I found this one. This is the second to last pin. It bound. That one, it's not binding too much. That one's not too much. This one's pretty stuck though. I feel that one's got, it's just difficult to push. And as I get that pop, I hear and feel a little click, and now I can tell there's not that spring tension anymore pushing on this pin. Instead, it's just gravity. So I'll try the first pin. First pin is very often the last one to go. So now I'll work my way back. I remember that second to last, or that final one was hard. Now he's even harder, right? So he's now the next one that's having, that's causing a serious bind. And it opened. So the other ones just happened to be in the right position already anyway. So there we can see picking the lock one by one with our fingers. Now, let me reset this. There are parts to a lock that I don't have in this model that allow, there's like a little shelf that allows those driver pins to not get caught. Or you can see on our little demo lock here, there's grooves in the cylinder. Those grooves allow the driver pins to not catch on anything after it's been opened in order to reclose it or relock it. So in keeping with the theme of my gigantic pin tumbler lock cutaway demo, I built some gigantic lock picks. So what I have here is a really big tension wrench. It's a little funny because it's sort of flat in 2D, not in the same dimensions as a real one, but it works well enough. And now I'm going to use a really large lifter pick or hook pick. And so as you can tell by the shape of it, it's kind of like when I'm pushing up on those pins with my finger. It's that same shape, and the idea behind this is to be able to, oh, let me switch cameras. I'm showing you things you can't see. Sorry about that. There we go. So this was the very large tension wrench or turning wrench or torsion wrench. This is a lifter or hook type of pick, and so it'll be able to get in, up, and under pins without disturbing its neighbors. This is sort of one of the paradoxes of building a lockpick, is that you need it to be thick enough so that it's got some strength, but thin enough so that it can get past pins that you don't want to disturb while you're moving the ones that you want to move, which is usually the ones that are binding. So let's see, I need to put this kind of on the edge of my workbench to be able to access. Let's see if I can access that, because this needs to, there we go. So I'm going to put my tension wrench in here, and you see I want it at the bottom of the keyway in this case so that there's room to get the pick in above it. So I'm putting a little bit of tension on, and then I'm going through, and I'm hearing a little pop. That guy's still stuck up there. That one's bound. Now we're cheating here, right? Because we can see these pins. Normally we're doing this just by feel. That one feels like it wants to go, but he's not sticking, so someone else is binding more than he is. Who is it? There we go. I think I was not putting quite enough tension on with the wrench, actually. It may have been picked for a lot longer. And that actually is a really interesting point. In picking, you've kind of got two things going on at the same time. You're wanting to apply this rotational force with one hand or one finger to get just enough pressure on the cylinder that you'll be able to bind pins, but not so much that you get things kind of stuck and jammed. It's actually possible to push the pin too high and get the little driver pin, the smaller lower guy, or the key pin rather, up too high. So I'm putting just enough. Hello, Yanescu. Yes, pick the lock. So we've picked the lock. So I'm putting just enough tension, and it's something that you will vary. And in fact, sometimes you will put such a light tension on it that you'll just drop your pick, or sometimes you'll put too much that you're starting to bend it, the tension wrench, or you'll get a little indentation in your finger. So varying that is actually one of the key things to picking early on. So now let's have a look. So that's the picking on the large demo. I'm going to move this over to the side here. And now let's have a look at picking our little cutaway lock here. So let's switch up a couple of these cameras. That one's just going to be my head leaning over, isn't it? Yeah, it sure is. Let me switch that one to workshop cam. There we go. Oh, Stuff with Kirby asks, going to cut a wood one on the CNC. That would be fun. Yeah, I dealt with the limitations of 2D for laser cutting this one because building the 3D model and 3D printing one, I had started doing that at one point a couple years ago when I was teaching some lockpicking classes, and I had some difficulties with tolerances on my model or something, so I kind of put that aside and went with this laser cut one, but it would be really fun to make an even larger scale CNC one, like cylinders 2 foot by 3 foot. It would be kind of cool. And yeah, so Adafruit just mentioned in the chat in YouTube, if you are interested in this kind of stuff, then Adabox 007 is going to be for you. You can head to adabox.com and learn more. It's our subscription-based quarterly box program that has really interesting stuff, teaches all kinds of interesting things. And if you like spy-ish stuff, the 007 one is going to be the one for you. So check that out. So let's take a look at picking this. Okay, so going with the same style of pick. So here I have, again, this little lifter or hook kind of pick. We'll use that, and let me grab a tension wrench. Where is a good one? This one should be good. So I'll show you this from a couple of angles, but right now let's just show it overhead. So I'm putting my tension wrench in, and you can see the cylinder turning a little bit as I relax and apply tension, right? And I'll turn. So this is what this looks like. So this is bottom of the keyway, this is called. There are also techniques, and sometimes you use a different type of tool. There are techniques where you'll find you have a little more clearance for what you're trying to do by putting your tensioner at the top of the keyway, and that leaves more space in the bottom. So now I should be able to do this just with bottom of the keyway, particularly because we're cheating and we can see the inside of the lock. So where did I put that hook pin? There it is. Yeah, that won't work. So I'll try to do this looking at the video. If I can see, I have a little video feedback monitor. Yeah, okay, so one thing I'll do is, let me remove the tension wrench here entirely. One thing you'll do typically is when you encounter a lock you need to pick, place your pick all the way into the back where you'll feel you're hitting sort of the back of the cylinder, and then work your way back forward, counting the pins as they drop. Let me move my mic up closer, see if you can hear this. All right, I'm going to just rake it so you can hear them a lot. All right, so that little click, 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 click sound, you should hear 6 of those. Maybe not when you're moving it that fast, but it's part of just counting what's in there, figuring out what you're dealing with. And now just, again, we'll do this one visually. What I'm doing is touching each of these pins and lifting them up, and you can see when they get to that spot where the driver is above the shear line. You see a little black line. And I'm feeling for who's difficult to push. All of these are really pretty easy, except for back here. There's a couple here that are a little difficult to lift up. So those are the ones that are binding. And so you can see I'm doing kind of a rocking motion. There's a couple ways to do this, but this is, you're moving things parts of a millimeter, so it's easier generally to get a little leverage and rock this pick up and down like that than it is to try to kind of lift your hand up and down in a plane. Okay, so here you can see this pin right here. I've got too much tension on my tension wrench, and I've lifted it above the shear line and gotten it stuck above the shear line. So there's actually the little key pin, the little rounded bottomed key pin is also above the shear line and stuck. So now I'm going to release some pressure, and what you'll do is you'll hear the pins drop. We can see it in this case, but you'll hear it as it just fell. And so did some others. But notice how they don't all fall at once, and this is why this picking is possible, this principle of some of them binding more than others. And I'll show you a diagram of why that happens in a second. based on the tolerances of how these things are manufactured. Okay, so I think everyone is picked except for the front pin. So if you watch this very first one, I'm going to move him a little more into camera view. This one now, I've got a decent amount of tension. I don't want anyone to drop, but not so much tension that I can't lift it. And watch what happens when I lift this one. Now it goes. Now you can see the cylinder is going to turn and the thing will open up. All right. So that, let me move over to the computer for a second. I'll show you what I'm talking about. These are some nice diagrams that I think were made by a pretty famous security expert and lockpicking educator named Deviant Olem. And I think I colorized them blue at one point. I can't remember why. Sorry for that, but they were beige. So here we can see the top view of where these pins and their springs are dropped into the top of the cylinder. And if they were perfectly aligned like this in a row, they would all bind at the same time when we put tension on. And you know, if we had perfectly manufactured pins, if those all had this really tight tolerances to them, then this method of picking actually wouldn't work. But this is what parts really look like. The drills and machining that's used, the tooling that's used rather, to make them wear out or get a little dull before they're changed, and it's not really worthwhile for most lock manufacturers to make these with incredibly high tolerances. If they had really high tolerances as well, I think sometimes the keys would be a little more finicky for the end user, and that's not what the manufacturers want. They want people who buy their locks to like their locks, whether they're that secure or not. So here we can see this is an exaggeration, but notice how these pins, the holes are not in a row. And so if I'm applying pressure, rotating the cylinder from this direction, this pin is going to bind first. This is the one that's kind of going to be the sticky pin. And here it is from the front. I think there's an animation with this one that I want to play. Let's see if you can see it. So there, okay, someone's turning it to the right. There it's binding and then boop, lifting up over the lip. I like this animation a lot, and it's also a view that I can't really show you with my cutaway stuff because I'm only showing side views. Here is setting multiple pins. Again, this is more like what we've just been doing, so you can see the tension wrench goes in. This one, there's a little animated icon that's popping up that's saying bind. So that's the one that binds first, if you remember from that top view. So here you're testing out to see, are these sticky? And they're really loose, right? They're moving very easily. In the chat, D. Henfer asks, that's not a Kennedy toolbox, it's a Gerstner. It's an old refurbished one. I keep a lot of my lock picking stuff in. Okay, so there you can see we're now clicking our way through and opening the lock. Okay, so back to the workbench here. Hopefully that helps people visualize what's going on inside of the lock. And I think, in general, knowing what it looks like, what it's doing, is helpful even though you normally can't see it. The way we really pick the lock is by feel almost entirely and a little bit by sound. But looking at the lock isn't the luxury you have when you're trying to open it. So let's now look at, I'll still do this with some cutaway locks or clear locks so that you can see it, but then I'll go to some regular locks and show you a few different picks and a few different picking styles that are helpful when you're getting started. So let's go back to, where's that one? A little overhead, okay. I will also say you don't necessarily have to buy lock picks if you want to go out and try this today. I've had a lot of success looking on the streets for street sweeper blades. I have a big collection of them here. I use them for all kinds of things, but they're particularly great for making little lock picks, these little spring steel. Let me switch you to a big view there. Oh, I had it. My button order is different than usual. So these little street sweepers that go and clean up the streets in your town shed these little blades. They have like 20,000 of them on one of their big brushes, and they shed these little bristles, which you can fashion into lock picks with a file or a grinder pretty easily. Just be careful about heat. You want to quench them as you work. And okay, so let's look now at a, we'll see how well we can see this one. Can you see that? I think you can see that pretty well. So this is a little plastic see-through practice lock. I'm going to put in a clamp here. Padlocks are really great for learning to pick on because they're easy to hold. Let me demonstrate that. This kind of a grip, getting this kind of grip and having a finger free to put tension. Oh, this is very small tension wrench. Let me get a normal sized one. How about, let's see how this one does. That one's a little big there, but this gets the point across. So being able to put tension on the lock with one hand while you're holding it, and then using the other hand to go in and do the picking. Yeah, this is a bad choice of a pick of a tensioner. So this is, where's a very standard one? Why have I lost a very, oh, here it is. It's stuck in a lock. There's a very standard one, okay. So, let's see if you can focus. Is that focused? Yeah. So you can see here, I'll go in with a different shaped pick. This is kind of a diamond. It's a very slim profile diamond. I'm putting the tension on, and then I think this one is not a good choice. So usually if you have a few, oh, I can feel it almost going. If you have a few picks, you can try a little bit with one before switching to another. This one's such a low profile that it's probably bumping neighboring pins when it's trying to lift up the pins I'm trying to lift. So I'm going to go back to the hook for a second, and then I'll show you some other profiles or heights of diamonds and some different picking styles that are useful with them. So here I'm doing kind of what, I'm listening for these clicks. I hope you can hear those. Click, click, click. Feels close. Let's look on. Let's look and cheat. So what's happened? Are we? You see that? Yeah. The reflection is kind of bad. So I think that all but one are set, and this is this little stubborn one here. Nope. All right. So I'm going to release tension. Oh, you see, none dropped. Okay, none of them were set. I think this hook might be too high. Embarrassing. This was an easy lock to pick. Oh, I've overset one. Can you see that line? I think I might, I want to open this just for pride, but I might switch to the other one because it's a little easier to see on camera in a second here. So what I'm trying to, this method that I'm trying to use that I've shown you so far is essentially called single pin picking. And so it's kind of the most artistic, precise picking forms because you're really, I can feel it. All right, that feels picked. Why is it not opening? You're really going in by feel and having a little relationship with the pins as you try to get each one lifted up. Most other attacks, and I'll show those in a second, are, oh, there we go, we got it open, are based on a little bit of finesse and a lot of randomness and help from the tool to avoid having to do this painstaking pin by pin picking. Now, pin by pin picking is much more helpful when you get to a harder lock or you get to locks with security bits in them. But what you'll see for people who do lock sports, which is kind of what it sounds like, it's picking locks under pressure of time against a competitor, you will use an array of picks that are much faster than that method. So let me do that one again without looking. Okay, so what I'm noticing is this hook is pretty big, so I'm having a hard time getting it in. And sometimes that's just because of the amount of space that's being taken up by the tension wrench. So I'm going to go, let me show you first a thinner tension wrench, because that one is kind of thick. Where'd that one go that I wanted to show you? It's not that one. Or I'll show you a top of keyway. So let's do a top of keyway one and see how that does. So the top of keyway pick has usually a little sort of serrated tooth to grab a bit and a pretty stubby little section that lives right here in the front. And the danger being it might jam the first pin if it's too deep, and if it's too shallow it'll pop out. These pop out a lot while you're working with them, so don't be surprised if you see me drop it. But I've got now all the room in here is free to access the pins with this kind of big hook. And I'm varying that, did I get it? No. I'm varying that tension with that finger up there. Not so much that I drop pins that I've gotten, but I'm trying to avoid that case of oversetting a pin with too much tension and driving it up in there. Oh, am I close? Feels close. Feels very close. Who's not up? Oh, I felt it go a little more. And what you sometimes will feel is the cylinder will move a little bit with each pin. It might turn, in this case, to the right, ever so slightly, more and more with each pin. Not always. You particularly see that when people are working with security pins. All right, who's bound? That you'll see very big turns because the pin is, like I said, shaped like a spool in many cases. All right, this is, so I would never attempt that long without switching out tools to see if, let's just do a mild change and say this is a smaller hook. And I'll try a few different tension wrenches even. You know, sometimes the top of keyway is just putting, oh, this is much better, I can tell, is putting the torque on it in a way that isn't helping you. It's actually part of my theory of why the first pins to bind are very often in the back. I think it's because we're not just rotating, but we're also sort of torquing laterally. All right, what is up with this lock? What am I missing? Is it just the front pin? Yeah, so maybe this top of keyway is making me, yeah, so I probably had it picked for a while, but I hadn't gotten that front one just because my tensioner was in the way, but there we go, that'll open. So let's move actually back to this cutaway, just because you can see it better on video. Those clear ones are fun and nice. I like those too, but this one will be easier for you to see what's going on. And now let's look at probably the second most common type of pick after that hook is a diamond. And where is my sort of standard diamond? I bet it's right here, yeah. These are really effective against a master lock number 3 padlock, so I'll show you that pick. So there you see it's like a little mountain peak, a little diamond shape. Let's grab, I'll use this tensioner. Oh, he's kind of big in there too. Let's see, does this fit? Okay, yeah, so you can see that the diamond can actually work a lot like the hook. And a diamond is actually a really nice one to go in and just rake back and forth to feel the pins to begin with. And oh, I think I just saw someone on YouTube mentioning it. So actually, I said that word rake, right? So what I'm going to do is put the pick in the back of the keyway, put a decent amount of tension on the cylinder, and then yank it out this way quickly. And what will often happen is that will set the pins without you doing one at a time. See, I overset that one. Put that back. And I think, there we go, we got it that time. The tension wrench I'm using is a little big for that, so I was kind of almost always a little too high. But that time it worked. I got the angle just right. And so what you'll do is you'll kind of rip it out, pull it out, try altering your angle a little bit, or raising or lowering it inside the keyway to pick it. And I mentioned that that's really effective on, for whatever reason, for years now, years and years, this very common type of master lock. This is a big tension wrench for this one, actually. Let's see if it works. Is very susceptible to putting the pick in the back of the keyway. Get your tension right. I'm not. And raking it out. Oh, this is usually a one try deal, but maybe not when I'm doing a YouTube video. Oh, come on. Come on, thing. If you look at lockpicking videos on YouTube, you will see people picking these with straws and just by looking at them, so it's incredibly embarrassing that I'm not getting it open with a proper tool. But let me get a different tension wrench in here just to make sure I'm not too high up the whole time. You won't be able to rake it if you're, oh, that tension wrench is tiny, if you're taking up too much height with the tool itself. All right, now I just got to believe. Got it. Nope. Well, maybe we won't get the usual. Oh, there we go. Got it. So that raking technique, honestly, that's usually a much faster process with that. For whatever reason, that attack works well. And it could just be the height of the pins that are typically in the lock, or the arrangement. I think this is the key. This is the key for that one. So, right, this is cheating, right? You don't know what the key looks like when you're picking it, but now looking at it, I can see that when I'm raking this lock, I want to kind of come up at an angle, just because the bitting happens to be, the pins are pretty low deep in and pretty high towards the front of the keyway. So those are the things that you're sort of varying blindly if you're not single pin picking as you're going through there. So bringing this one back into play, let's look at just really one or two other major types of picks that are common, and these are different types of wavy shapes. And so I've got, here's one. This is a type of a snake. It's a pretty extreme one. It's pretty fat or tall. And let's see if I can, that's not a good tensioner for this. That one good? That one might be. What you're, oh, let me move this over. What you're banking on with some of these is random chance. So the fact that, yeah, we have not replicated the key, you're not going to turn this thing in there by itself. But the fact that if you do similar types of scrubbing things like I was doing before with a wavy shape, you may be it might be a higher probability that you're going to encounter the right combination all at the same time. And I'm kind of, yeah, there we go. Yeah, and I've got it, right? So that was just really in and out a couple times, varying the tension, varying the stroke, and it just finds the right pattern for you. So this is a lock that I was trying to pick before, and let me let's see, can I switch camera views and show you this? So I built some stands, these little wooden stands to hold cylinders. These are really neat little progressive locks that you can get. You can make them yourself. You can buy lock cylinders and then open them up and pull out pins. So this one's got the full 5 in it, but then I have ones that have 4, 3, and 2, and I made some of my own that have just 1. And those are what I often teach with. In fact, let me show you. Here's the 1 pin. That one's easier to put in front of this camera. So I've opened it up. Let me grab, I can show you what those little pins look like. I don't think I have an open lock, but if you go online, you'll see there's usually a retention clip on the back of the cylinder that you want to open up. And then as you do this, you'll end up with lots and lots of driver pins, key pins, and little teeny springs. And this is how locks are rekeyed, by the way, is by putting different lengths, carefully measuring them. I think there's a standard of maybe 8 heights of those key pins on a typical lock, like a quick set lock. And then marking down those numbers, and that's what the sort of guide is to cutting the key. So this one I've got just a single pin in, so it's a really great training thing for people to see the very first time, because you just kind of can't mess it up. If you put anything in there, even a straight piece of metal, I'll use the back end of a tension wrench. If you put, oh, sorry, I got that out of camera view. If you put kind of anything in here, and I'm putting tension on, at some point, I'm going to lift that above the, why is that not opening? Hello? This is a 1-pin lock. How can that be hard for me to pick? Hold on. Let me actually use a pick. Was this one just damaged or stuck? Does this one turn? Sometimes, this is not one of those cases, sometimes you will encounter locks that only want to be unlocked in one direction. Oh, this one has a bunch of pins in it. Okay, sorry. I have another one here that I wanted to show you that's a single pin. Where'd you go? Maybe it's this one. Yeah, maybe. Maybe I did that to trick students and myself. I don't know. Why would I do that? Okay, let's try that demo again and really use just a piece of whatever. This is a good beginning demo. You can almost see the pin in there. And when that gets raised up, I'll use a pick so you can see it. When that gets raised up, it just automatically opens. Right? So that's a really good first experience, and then you move on to 2, 3, 4, and 5. So let me switch cameras. Yeah, someone was asking about places to get picks. Definitely check Tool for some recommendations. I do like Sparrows, someone mentioned. There's a website, a company called Sparrows, who makes some nice picks. Some of these are from Sparrows. I also like Peterson. So I want to, let's see, we have about 15 minutes left. So I want to show you a couple of interesting tools and mention one other sort of rake type of pick that you'll run into. This is called a Bogota. So here's, let me switch back to this camera. Nope. Yeah, there you go. So here's what is this? A 4-pin lock, and I was finding this one to be kind of tricky with a diamond, or with raking with a diamond, or with a lifter hook. But this Bogota, similar to that other kind of wavy rake, has a multiple peak pattern that happens to very often, by doing a kind of crazy in and out and up and down, almost like a figure 8, you again just kind of happen upon sometimes the proper random distribution of pin heights. So let me see if I can put this in here, this back of this cylinder. I want to make sure that doesn't get pinched. Let me rotate this a little bit so you can see. Or, well, can I put it in there like that? Let's see. Pardon me. While I prep this one. I like using these wooden stands because it's a little more of a real world, like sort of doorknob type of arrangement, but it's harder to video. Okay, that should be able to turn still. And I think you can see it. So that's good. That's a win. Let's grab, let's see, it might be, I'll try a top of keyway. This one is a top of keyway that has a little bend to it that makes it easier to kind of get out of the way. Okay. You are in danger of making it go flying when you're picking with a Bogota because the style tends to be like this. Like, oops, and see, there goes the dropping of the pick. Because what I'm doing a lot is, while I'm doing the crazy motion with the Bogota, I am increasing and decreasing tension. I'll try it holding it. It's a little weird, but and sometimes you let off tension enough that you go flying. Oops, sorry, camera. And you can stop for a moment and feel like, does anyone feel bound? You can use it like other types of picks. There's not a strict set of rules. Oh, bouncing around on your camera. Oh, you can't see that. Okay, I was having success with this one on this lock before, but I don't think with that tension wrench. So let me move to bottom of the keyway. That one's a little small. There was one, I think it was this one. This one was working well. These, by the way, you see these zigzag patterns? Those are unique. That's actually one of the only things that's copyrighted on locks and keys, is the unique shape that leads to the sort of end-on profile of the key, and that's what makes it harder to pick. If those are tighter and zigzaggier, it's harder to get your tool in there. Oh, I'm really bumping the camera. I'm gonna try to use this. Sorry. Got it. Okay, so there you can see it's not finesse, right? The single pin picking is one of the more finessed styles. The Bogota is just sort of crazy random distribution and a little bit of finesse with how much tension you're applying, the speed and the direction. But you know, this is a very typical. Pretty much all the locks in the United States, if you go to a hardware store, are going to be Schlage or Kwikset, and it's that cylinder right there is what you're picking. So I also wanted to show you, so I had mentioned, let me switch cameras again. I had mentioned other wacky tools, and I also mentioned the direction that you're picking. Let me move this one up here so you can see it. So this is a typical sort of deadbolt lock. Flip that over and I'll open that. Here's the key. And what you'll see is it throws this bolt when it gets turned. And imagine this is on the door and the door jamb is here to the right. It throws that bolt into the right. Now, for whatever reason, sometimes it's easier to pick in the wrong direction. So I've run into locks where it'd be easier, or you just accidentally do it, pick to the right, which doesn't help you because you need to turn to the left to get this thing open. So let me dock this thing into a stand and show you what happens in that case. This is kind of a cool tool for fixing that situation. So let's see. I'm going to do it with this camera, this other overhead. Let me make that one the large one. And I'll see if I can zoom in a bit more. There we go. This is just so I don't bump the camera when I'm trying to pick it. So what I'm going to do is try to pick it to the right first. And then I'm going to use a tool to make it fly to the left really quick-like. That seems like a reasonable tension wrench for that. And what do I want to try to pick it with? Let's see how a diamond does first. this so you can see it. Talk about doing 7 things at once. There we go. Okay, no luck with that. I'll do a Bogota. And by the way, I am not super expert at lockpicking. I've been doing it a long time and I enjoy it, but I don't sport pick, go online. Check out Bosnian Bill, happens to be a guy with a YouTube channel who's a master, and I love watching his stuff. He'll give you much better tips on good technique than you're going to get from me. I can get you the basics and get you going. And embarrassingly, again, this is a very easy lock to pick, but I'm going to switch tension wrenches because I feel like that one might be biting. This one's too fat. So I feel like I got something overset because I released tension and nothing popped down, and then I went beyond that to the left, and I hear those guys. So I'm going to try less tension so I don't overset stuff. Let me switch picks again. And I'm going to actually put a top of keyway in here so I have a lot of room. Oop, there goes that one. That always happens to me with those. I don't think you really need to get too fancy with tension wrenches. I've seen some things that like have adjustable, like a mechanism where you can tack it to a door and it'll pull for you and bind to the lock. It's usually more than you need. Oh, come on. Unfortunately, this is not something I can demo for you by using the key, because the key can't be in there to do what I'm going to do, and keys don't come out. That's the difference between keys and picks. Picks actually come out after it's opened. All right, I'm going to try single pin picking it. Really feel what's going on in there. I feel a back one that's really hard to get up there, so maybe this is just too much tension. Oh, I got it. Yeah. So that was kind of the rocking up and down technique, moving forward and back and feeling for the harder binds, getting those up, and then the rest fell open pretty quickly. So hopefully this will work because we get one shot at it before I'd have to pick it again. Let me set this straight. So the idea is if I could turn it to the left really fast, really, really, really fast, the springs wouldn't have time to throw those little driver pins down because they're currently separated on that shear line. So remember on our wood model, the state of things right now, while it's picked, is I'm kind of rotated a bit to the right. And there's metal there that's holding these top ones from popping down, even though there's springs in the real one. The tool I'm going to use is going to very, very quickly rotate the cylinder here before those pins have time to come down. So where is that cool tool? Here it is. I forget what these are even called. Plug spinner. There's a plug spinner. You can see it's this little spring-loaded thing that rotates rapidly. So I want to turn to the left. So I'm going to cock this thing, cock this thing about a turn and a half to the right. so that it has pretty good force. And then I'm gonna kind of video this for you. Let's switch our angle like that. Here we go. So now I'm gonna set this in here, pull the trigger, and let's hope it works. Yeah, it worked. So now the deadbolt is thrown, because even though I picked it wrong to the right, it just went phew, so fast to the left that it never had time to relock itself. So let's see. Any questions in the chat? Andrew Murphy says, sometimes I put too much tension on the lock and it won't pick. Yeah, it's like kind of the number one thing. Too much tension, especially when you're under pressure. You're trying to show people on the internet and you're going to look like an idiot if you can't get it open, and you try harder, right? You can't. You have to like be super zen and relaxed with these things, and change up your tools. You saw I tried a couple different tools before I opened some of these. That's what you'll run into as well if you watch the pros who are doing the lock sports. They will have a sort of series of locks that they'll try for 3 seconds, move on to the next one, or picks rather, and they'll vary their technique so that they aren't stuck for any great amount of time trying kind of the wrong thing. So I guess that wraps up what I wanted to show you today. I'm going to probably post some little close-up videos as well to Instagram on Adafruit account, so keep an eye out for those. And let me step over here and hop into the chat for a minute. I know this was a decidedly low-tech stream today, but I think there tends to be a lot of interest among people who like to do things with their hands and tinker and build things and make things and understand things and take them apart. That usually intersects really well with the group of people who want to or like to pick locks. So that will hopefully get you started. I've really only scratched the surface. I may kind of come back to this topic again in the future if people are interested. Pin tumbler locks are the most common you'll run into, and probably the most common for people to pick, and especially in lock sports to have fun with picking. There are other types of locks that are interesting. Warded locks, you'll find inexpensive warded locks a lot. There are very secure, very difficult to pick disc detainer locks. There's a type of pin tumbler where all the pins are on the side. You'll see keys that have like little dimples in the sides. It's basically a pin tumbler turned sideways. It's also a pin tumbler turned radial, which is what you used to see a lot on bicycle locks. The kryptonite locks would have those tubular locks, which again is actually just a pin tumbler that's been curled around into a circle. Anyway, super interesting topic. Hope you enjoy that. And I want to mention that we have a coupon code today for 10% off on your order, excluding gift certificates, for 1 day only, today until midnight tonight. You can use the code PADLOCK to get 10% off of your order at Adafruit. That is all I've got for today. I will be hanging out in the chat over on Discord for a little bit, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.